Hello, dear friends. I try to describe the crisis as objectively as possible. Opinion piece, societal collapse, loss of confidence, the system is failing, end of social contract, mathematical certainty, cosmic reset versus Davos, attack on the missionaries of light. Toynbee foresaw the stifling of creativity. Spengler predicted government caesarism. Let's start. A collapse is the failure of a system or social structure that can produce a paralysis of its activities caused by traffic jam, congestion, or blockage. It is known that the system will collapse sooner or later. The question is not what, but how and when. Once systemic failure occurs, it could not be recovered. That is to say, when the collapse of the old society occurs, it would be an irreversible process, so it could not be stopped. People don't understand why this takes so long and why life is so complicated, but change is not easy. The gradual transformation of humankind is not a matter of 1 or 2 weeks, but takes a few years. But at the precise moment that the system fails, it will be a quite drastic and intense process, and we are already seeing the first signs of the collapse that began in April of this year, when some banks failed. The collapse process is contained so far, but when the time comes, it would be impossible to contain it, like a dam breaking, and that time will inevitably come sooner or later. Definition: social collapse is the fall of a complex human society characterized by the loss of cultural identity and social complexity as an adaptive system, the fall of government, and the increase in violence. Possible causes of social collapse include natural disaster, war, pestilence, famine, economic collapse, population decline or overpopulation, mass emigration, and sabotage by rival civilization. A collapsed society may revert to a more primitive state, be absorbed by a stronger society, or disappear entirely. Virtually all civilizations have suffered this fate, regardless of their size or complexity, but some of them have later revived and transformed, such as China, India, and Egypt. However, others have never recovered, such as the Western and Eastern Roman empires, the Mayan civilization, and the Easter Island civilization. Social collapse is generally rapid but rarely abrupt. Social pact. We are not only talking about a financial collapse, but also about a political and social contract. Society works because people have a certain degree of trust, but the population's trust in the political and social system is becoming less and less. When truth when trust falls below a certain threshold, collapse occurs. The timing of failure is key to different timelines and different possible outcomes. Nobody knows the exact moment. A contract is a pact or agreement, oral or written, between parties who are bound by a specific matter or thing, and whose compliance may be mandatory. The social contract is an agreement made within a group by its members, such as the one acquired in a state in relation to the rights and duties of its citizens. It starts from the idea that everyone in the group agrees with the social pact of their own free will, by virtue of which they admit the existence of an authority and the laws to which they submit. The current problem is that the agreement that supports the social pact is disappearing, and the people are the owners of their sovereignty. Systemic failure. Most people believe, believed in the system before the crisis, but that trust is slowly disappearing. In August 2019, the beta timeline crashed, and we have been talking and we have been walking a tightrope ever since. At that moment, the forces of light saw very clearly that they will not be able to make a safe transition from the old timeline to the new line of ascension. Faced with the mathematical certainty of a complete systemic failure of the entire political and financial system of the old society, the dark forces realized that its financial system was at risk of collapse since January 2020, which explains the health crisis to close the economy and try to preserve the system. The real reason for everything was to avoid financial collapse. The system became unstable in March 2020. A lockdown began. The apparent recovery began in 2022. We are somewhere before the buffer that was depleted to keep the system running collapses. But right now, the system has no buffer or backup at this time, so it is exposed to the elements of world events. If the light grid were stable, the dark forces would not be able to engineer war. But on the other hand, the galactics have avoided many wars, perhaps 20 or more. They have avoided a war in Ukraine 5 times, the war between Iran and Israel 4 or 5 times. But they can't stop everything because it's too much. Causes. British historian Arnold J. Toynbee explored the rise and fall of 28 civilizations and concluded that civilization failed primarily due to internal factors, but external pressure also played a role. He said that all civilizations go through several stages: genesis, growth, problems, universal state, and disintegration. Similarly, the German philosopher Oswald Spengler analyzed the decline of the West in 1918. He predicted that around the year 2000, Western civilization would enter a period of pre-death emergency, the counteracting of which would lead to 2 centuries of caesarism. That is, extra-constitutional omnipotence of the executive branch of government, before the final collapse of Western civilization. Does it look like Spain? For Toynbee, a civilization is born when a creative minority successfully responds to the challenges posed by its physical, social, and political environment. However, the fixation on the old methods of the creative minority leads it to stop being creative and degenerate into a mere dominant minority, which forces the majority to obey without deserving said obedience, which does not recognize new forms of thought. He maintains that creative minorities deteriorate due to worship of their former selves, so they become prideful and fail to adequately address the next challenge they face. Toynbee argues that the definitive sign that a civilization has collapsed is when the dominant minority forms a universal state, stifling political creativity. First, the dominant minority attempts to maintain by force, against all right and reason, a position of inherited privilege that it no longer deserves. And when the proletariat pays for injustice with resentment, fear with hatred, and violence with more violence, when it carries out its acts of secession, the dominant minority creates a universal state, the internal proletariat a universal church called communism, and the external proletariat a group of barbarian war bands. However, the entire movement ends in the end in positive acts of creation and regeneration on the part of all the actors in the tragedy of disintegration, and the latter is what gives us hope. Quarantine. The Earth quarantine was created 26,000 years ago when dark forces decided to take over this planet as their stronghold. What they did was completely close the surface of the planet and control it. They used very powerful advanced technologies based on the electromagnetic field and scalar fields to control physical and non-physical planes. They closed all interdimensional portals to prevent the intervention of the forces of light and expelled the benevolent forces from the surface of the planet. When the forces of light had to go underground or rise into the air, then, then, everyone who entered the planet had to receive permission from the dark forces. Otherwise, everyone who entered spaceship risked being destroyed or captured. For this reason, extraterrestrial contact has been drastically reduced in the last 26,000 years. In the last 5,000 years, extraterrestrial contacts were very rare. There are cosmic races that still influence the surface population to some extent, but very rarely through physical contact, most often through spiritual guidance, such as inspiration, visions, or brief sightings. This control mechanism was reinforced in 1996, when the majority of Orion's forces arrived on planet Earth. They have put additional technologies to reinforce the quarantine based on electromagnetic field and scalar. Before 1996, we had many more extraterrestrial contacts, both physical and non-physical. As we approach to the end of the cycle, this quarantine must be dismantled. Most dark control technologies have been removed. The solar system is liberated. The underground bases are liberated. But most of the planet's surface is still under the control of dark forces. The Chimera or Spider people gave the mandate to the black nobility 26,000 years ago to manage the affairs of the planet. The families of the black nobility became administrators of the surface populations, or rather jailers. Since then, they ran the political and financial system in whatever form it exists. But now that the Chimera group has been eliminated, the black nobility is the main obstacle remaining on the physical plane to prevent the liberation of humankind. Attacks. There is a deeper layer to control the population especially awake. Dark forces select individuals from the list who are their target. They use satellites to track and monitor targeted people, especially the most awakened lightworkers, are attacked with scalar and microwave weapons and directed energy weapons. All of these programs have been active for decades. Many missionaries of light are targeted by this. Benevolent forces are beginning to dismantle this in recent years. The power of control is becoming less and less. The list of dark forces is shorter. Some lightworkers are no longer targeted. Of course, some individuals continue to be attacked, sometimes even more strongly than before. But this is going to dissolve until the event. It's not easy to dismantle all this, because certain individuals involved in this process know that they are part of a dark agenda. Government officials everywhere consider lightworkers to be terrorists, even though they are saints who speak of peace and love and are totally peaceful. This injustice must be stopped quickly, and we hope that the majority of light missionaries will not be targeted next year, says Cobra. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.